Welcome to Smart Software with Smart Logic, a podcast where we talk about best practices in web and mobile software development with a focus on new and emerging technologies. My name is Justice Epen, and I'm your host today. I'm a developer here at Smart Logic, a Baltimore-based consulting company that has been building custom web and mobile applications since 2005. This season on Smart Software, Season 2, we are focused on the inner workings of Elixir and the inner workings of popular Elixir libraries or Elixir internals. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing my colleague, Eric Oestrich, who's responsible for the wildly successful Elixir MUD framework, ExVenture. Eric, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background, Smart Logic, and how you got started with Elixir?
So I guess I got started with Elixir after we had another coworker that was interested in it. We did a small project that, should it fail, we could rewrite in Ruby. So it was a 2-week project.
Thank God it succeeded.
Yeah, it succeeded well. Still running on some tiny Heroku dyno somewhere, as far as I know, without any intervention from us required. So then that went so well, we started our next big project in Elixir that was handed to me, and then the rest is history. Started learning Ecto, getting excited about pattern matching, all that fun stuff. And then about, 8 months later after that project started, more curious about OTP stuff and how to learn that. And yeah, I started poking at Ranch to see how that was working. Got something set up, and then got a listener going, which is what they call a listener protocol. And then the rest, ExVenture spun out of that, and Grapevine came out of that, and just all kinds of tiny libraries and applications and whatnot. I guess our company, we've been doing, I think we've only had one Rails new since that first project. And that was mostly because we weren't sure that we should hoist Elixir on possibly another team taking over, since we weren't. That was within the first year at that point. It turns out we were still that team, so we probably should have just went with Elixir, but whatever.
I want to, before we move on to the other questions we have here, I want to hear a little bit about the success that you've had since starting with Elixir. You've spoken at a number of conferences. Can you talk a little bit about the success of ExVenture and your speaking career getting started here?
That's all from ExVenture. Kind of spun up as a way to learn Elixir internals, right? And kind of push to places that you wouldn't take a client application, someone who's paying you consultancy rates. You don't want to just go charging into the wild and be like, I hope this works. So yeah, it's a nice little side project that has, for better or worse, taken over my life. But yeah, so it's played around with, specifically the path that led me to speaking was I really wanted to play around with the distribution, Erlang distribution, and figuring out how hard it was to take an application that was very set up to be a single node. I was using Elixir registry, which is in the docs it says this is a single node only, right? So you have to restructure kind of how you're registering global processes, how you're handling cache and whatnot, figuring out how hard it was to get a single node, be 2 nodes, be 3 nodes, be however many nodes you want. And so that took about an evening, which is pretty great. And then it took a total of a week to have something set up that had a leader node that then spanned across a cluster, etc. Most of that was reading the Raft paper and learning how it was doing leader selection, and then writing a library that did that. But within the first 4 hours, I had something that was working in some amount. So that was really cool. I think that was
the subject of your first Elixir Conf talk. Yep. You've since spoken at the Big Elixir.
Yeah, the Big Elixir was the same talk. Mm-hmm. And then the most recent one was Lone Star Elixir, which was about Prometheus metrics, which was kind of the next big thing of New Relic went pay only, and they killed their server offering the free version, which is typically good enough for most of our clients. We just want to know when something happens and then we'll see the email, and within the next day or so, whatever the free window was, we would take a look at it and like inspect it and whatnot. We'd looked at Prometheus prior to New Relic doing its thing, and so we decided to swing back around to it. That looked to be the best one within the last year or so. Being in Go is pretty nice. I know we're in Elixir, but being able to just download the binary and just like run it is pretty great.
It's interesting to me that the seasons of the podcast that we're doing sort of mirrors your own experience of learning Elixir. I mean, initially you got started by working on applications that you had to push into production because they were client work. And then you wanted to learn more, so you dove into the internals of Elixir and OTP in order to build your own libraries and framework. And ExVenture has become extremely popular. You have like 400 plus stars on GitHub. Can you talk a little bit about ExVenture, how you got started writing that library, what it is, what a MUD is for people who don't know?
Yeah, so ExVenture is as I like to say, it's not a MUD, it's a massively multiplayer online text game. So it's like World of Warcraft or EverQuest, except if you took all the graphics and then just deleted it. So everything is described through text. You kind of wander around, you type in commands, and then the game gives you the response in terms of an output. So if I like move to a new place, it'll describe that place, tell you where you can go, what's in that room, who else might be in that room, whatnot. And so you kind of go explore, and the graphics are as strong as your imagination, right? So if you have a pretty good imagination, if you like doing Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop stuff, then you can this is also a probably something you might be interested in. So I've always kind of wanted to mess around with those. Tried a few failed starts in Ruby. I could never figure out the concurrency model, and which is kind of funny. I was playing around with Celluloid at that time, which I have now found out is it's Erlang hoisted into Ruby.
Really?
Because it has supervision trees. It's got actor process.
But it's not Erlang. It's like a port.
Yeah. So it's a port of the supervision tree and actor model.
What is that quote that we like to reference all the time about any sufficiently complex distributed system duplicates all the features of
it's Robert Verding's, one of the creator of Erlang's first rule of programming. Any sufficiently complicated concurrent program in another language contains an ad hoc, informally specified, bug-ridden, slow implementation of half of Erlang.
Which is what Celluloid is.
Yep.
Great. Okay.
No disrespect to Celluloid, of course, but
I still use Ruby every day. Yep. I love Ruby. It's great. But we're talking about Elixir, and we're talking about ExVenture. So ExVenture it's a massively multiplayer online text game. MUDs are multi-user dungeons, which is sort of shorthand for this whole genre of text-based games. Is it fair to say that they're having a renaissance?
I would like to say so, given that I'm so heavily involved in it. But yeah, I think there's a number of games that have been stagnant for the last 10 to 15 years that are being rediscovered as the people who played these in the 90s in college, their kids are now grown up and they have free time again, so they're starting to be more re-involved in the games that they're playing. So yeah, I think there's a decent amount of revival in this space. So yeah,
very cool. Now take me through the story of ExVenture from the top, maybe focusing on the biggest hurdles that you had to overcome as you were getting started, and then once it was in production. Just tell me about the genesis of this and the difficulties that you faced.
Yeah, so ExVenture started, I was at a Barnes & Noble. I think I had PD time, so I was like, just go out and work at a cafe or something. Mm-hmm. And so I was figuring out how the Ranch's Cowboys TCP acceptor. Mm-hmm. So figuring out how they're called protocols, how when a new connection comes in, Ranch spins up a separate process that runs your module. It's figuring out how that starts, which is actually, you need to start it as a special process that then kicks into a gen server, which is a little wonky. So I did a blog post on that, and then I was like, this is a MUD server almost. I've always kind of been interested in that. Keep going for the next week or so.
So you built a thing, and that inspired. Okay.
Yep. And then so after that, it turned into adding simple logins. So character users became a thing, And then
did you use any libraries for authentication at this point, or did you spin it yourself?
No, it was all through Telnet at this point, so it's wildly insecure.
Still?
Not anymore.
Okay, but at that point it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sending your passwords through clear text on Telnet is like the norm, for better or worse.
So I'm a total idiot. What is Telnet?
So Telnet is the thing that existed before SSH. Almost exactly what you type is sent over the wire, no compression. Well, yeah, no compression, no encryption, no nothing. What you type, everyone sees.
So this was an internet protocol prior to SSH.
Yeah,
okay.
up until sometime in the mid 90s, I think.
And these things never go, like once they're made, they never go away, right? Because it's just a way, it's a protocol of communication. Okay. And then, so you create this TCP connector, you have like an Echo server built, you've got new clients, logins, then you start building game features. What does that look like?
So I think it started out as just being able to see who was online, so figuring out like the Elixir registry to when you sign in, it registers your like player process into the registry, so that when you type who, you can see who else is like you pull the whole list, remove yourself from it, and then display it.
So every user has their own process?
Yep.
Okay. And then you've got like game features, like that, you're able to move.
Yep.
How do those work?
So that was I guess the next thing was probably doing the movement. So that required a world to move in. So I had a world supervisor that supervised zones, and the zones are like a city type thing. It's like it's a wide area in terms of game space, and then under that it hosts all of the rooms inside that zone, as well as any NPCs, so non-player characters.
Again, I'm a complete idiot. I don't know anything. What do you mean by supervisor? What is a supervisor in Elixir?
So this is the Erlang supervisor. So it's how every process, typically every process is underneath the Erlang supervision tree. So when your application boots, it has an application controller which starts your main application supervisor, which then spins out all of the supervisors under it. So that if you have a Phoenix application that runs underneath your Erlang application, that is then, there's an endpoint, the Phoenix pub sub, all that stuff is hanging underneath the Phoenix app. And then Ecto has its own supervisor. So what the supervisor does is notice when a process dies, and it has a restart rules to it. So like if one process dies, it may just restart that process. If one process dies, it may restart all of them.
So how did you, as you're beginning to architect this, and you're coming from a Rails background where you don't have to think about that at all, how did you think about what are the questions that you ask yourself when you're deciding, do I spin up a new process to do this? Where does it live in the supervision tree? What kind of questions do you ask yourself, and how do you decide when is the right time to spin up a new process? Is it always the right time? Like what? Yeah.
So that's something that will change throughout your life as an Elixirist. I think at that point, it was everything should be a process, like processes for as much as I possibly can, send messages around. That's slowly changed throughout my career as an Elixir developer. It's kind of whatever feels right is probably right. I don't know. It's like a really loose rule. But
and I guess I'm just thinking, like, from my perspective, as someone who's a lot more of a novice than you, I am never thinking about like, oh, I should spin up the process for this, unless it's something that's like a background task.
Yep.
That, that's clearly, okay, I need some kind of background task for this.
Yeah, so, and that can get you 95% of the way if you're just doing Phoenix, because like Phoenix can serve the stateless Rails-like application without caring about any of the OTP stuff, which is it's pretty great. So like when you start wanting a process is like when you want stateful stuff, right? So the TCP connection to the game is very stateful because that cannot drop, and if it drops, it's like it's a new session, like you're logged out. There's no stateless things in the telnet connection. So like when someone connects, you want a process that is them and somehow. So like that's a good time to do one. Background tasks is a good time. So like if you're doing emails, the typical thing that you do with like Sidekick of sending it through there, that's a good thing to boot out of your Phoenix process. Any kind of, if there's a complicated task that needs to happen, that like you can send a message to a gen server, which then kicks off, maybe it fans out to a bunch of other processes and it kind of bounces around and whatnot. Platform text Broadway should help with that as well for
What is
background
Broadway?
stuff. So Broadway was from, I think, Lone Star Elixirs around that time at least was when it was announced. I haven't looked too much into it, but it's a way to do producer consumer stuff, so the gen stage, but more managed for you. So it does the supervision trees and whatnot for you, so you don't have to think too much about it.
Maybe that's something we'll talk to Jose about in his episode of season 2. I want to move on. So at this point we've talked about you added commands like move and say, etc. We've talked a little bit about like zones and rooms and the world management. I'm sure that you also had some front end things that you added, but I want to maybe back up a little bit, because at some point you started extracting a framework from this application that you were building. What was that like? How did you know when it was time to do that? Tell us about some of the pieces that you've extracted from ExVenture and that have become libraries under there.
Yeah, so the first thing that came out was from Elixir Talk going multi-node. I pulled out the Raft library, so that's called Squabble. So it's a silly name, since it doesn't matter which node is the leader, as long as one of them is. So that's kind of the whole point behind it. It's a simple leader election. There's a callbacks set of stuff for it that if you're picked a leader, you'll get the module called, so you can do whatever you want when that happens. I think that's the only thing that's been pulled directly out of ExVenture. There's been a few other things that have been pulled out of then Gossip, now Grapevine. I had an Elixir client for Gossip.
What is Grapevine and Gossip?
Yeah, so Gossip was a chat network for a bunch of MUDs to span their communication networks across everyone.
So I could be playing one game and talk to a friend that's playing another game.
Yep. Yeah. So
which
it's
had never been done before.
It has been done before, but it was through, as typical in Mudland up until recently, it's all insecure traffic between. It was called the Intermud Network, or the i3 network. There's like a few names for it, but so they had routers. You would connect up to a router, and then they would connect between each other. So it's kind of a little mesh network, which is pretty cool. But it was through just standard TCP connections with like known packets being sent back and forth, but there's no encryption on it, which is not good in this day and age.
So with Gossip, you've created encrypted.
Yeah, so it uses secure WebSockets, so WSS. So it is from your server up to there. It's an encrypted tunnel, and then it's all in the same server, and then gets blasted out through another encrypted tunnel back to the other server. So at least between everyone, it's encrypted.
Right.
So over the wire, it's encrypted.
And how many games are a part of the Gossip network? Or is it still called Gossip, or have you changed it?
So it got rebranded to be called Grapevine.
Which is a better name for this.
Yeah. So there was a weird story. Gossip started, and then I started Grapevine, which was actually a consumer of Gossip that had a super-powered WebSocket, which was really cool to do, where you update something on Gossip, and then instantly it's on Grapevine through like Phoenix PubSub internally of Grapevine, and then it gets pushed out across the WebSocket over to Grapevine, and then it has a little callback that does whatever. So it was redoing a synchronization mechanism. But anyways, so that was confusing to people, and rightfully so. And then they got merged together. The Grapevine name won out, and now it's just the same app. So Grapevine was like a Xbox Live / Steam type thing, where you could eventually have achievements for the games. You could see each other's profiles and have like a single place for like who you are and like see where you're playing and whatnot. It's since also pulled in a web client, so you can play these games on Telnet without using Telnet, or knowing that you're even using Telnet, which is pretty cool. I forgot what the question was.
No, so it was about Grapevine, and I think you answered it. I want to back up pedal a little bit now, because we're on our last 10 minutes or so, and I want to hear commands was the first feature that you really built as far as game-specific feature in ExVenture. I want to know, because I've seen your implementation of commands evolve since you initially built it. It makes heavy use of one of Elixir's core language features, which is pattern matching. Can you talk a little bit about pattern matching and what it is, why it's valuable, why it's kind of an application killer as far as Ruby versus Elixir? Talk about that a little bit.
The way that pattern matching works is, at least how I have it set up, I have a newer implementation as well, so maybe I'll describe both of them. So the V1, which is currently in ExVenture now, there's a known list of modules that are a command, right? So each one of those commands has a def parse on it with a single argument, I think two now for context. But the main point is the string that you type in is passed directly into the first argument of these parse functions. And so it's literally pattern matching on the string, like move north. And so like if that matches exactly through the pattern matching, then it catches that function and returns a tuple that explains what the hell to do into the run function down below. So yeah, so it takes your string and then I think it does a enum find across all the commands that it has. And it's an ordered list roughly. Like the ones you're more likely to do are at the top, kind of in an ordered list, and then the rest are just alphabetical. So like movement is number 1. Number 2 is probably global, like communication stuff, and then the rest are just down below. So it loops across all of them, tries to find one. If it finds one, then that module will parse itself however it needs it, returns a thing that's like, here's how you run me. Once it's found one, or if it's found one, it runs it. The V2 is a new test library or a new test server that I've been playing around with that is heavily inspired through Phoenix. So there's a command router. So instead of like get, post, put those matches, it's command, and then the string it's looking for with variables in it, the same like parameter colon matches. That one's actually a regex.
So why is that preferable to just dynamically loading up all the command modules and searching through them?
So the reason I went with, I guess, both approaches, the command router specifically, I wanted a way to, the first version, everything is just under def run, and then like whatever the parse thing was with them, and then state, and that feels sloppy, I guess, as it's gotten as big as it is, because everything is just def run, like this thing, def run this thing, and it like pattern matches like 12 times in the same module, which is its own problem. But this way, the V2, the command router, I wanted it so that you would say it looks a lot more like what a controller in Phoenix would be. So it's like the index, for example, would be like base. So it'd be, if you just type in help, it'll call the module help.base. If you want a specific topic, it'll call help.topic with whatever the parse parameters are. It feels more clean, I guess.
Definitely easier to understand from a legibility standpoint.
Yeah.
Okay, now we are on our last set of questions here. I want to know about what features of OTP you've gotten to integrate into ExVenture, into all the libraries surrounding ExVenture. Talk about what OTP features you've used and what you use them for.
So I guess we've already talked about distributed Erlang. So like kind of before that, I'd done caching. So that's the Erlang term storage, ETS. So figuring that out, figuring how you can insert, look up, kind of do easy caching, and then so you have distributed Erlang enters, and they have to figure out process groups. So that's PG2. So that's a way that each node can, or I guess you can do process groups locally too. So it's each kind of process says like, oh, I'm part of the world, like I'm part of the processes that care about world leader selection.
How is this distinct from supervision trees?
You host a PG2, or there's a single PG2 process. I think there's a single one on each node. And then each process registers that it cares about a specific group. So it's kind of separate from the supervision.
So if I'm imagining like a supervisory tree, which is basically a monophyletic tree, and then you've got process groups that can span across that.
Yep.
Okay.
Across and up and down.
So if you've got like the tree of life, and you've got dogs and cats in two different trees, or parts of the tree, you could have pets that spans across. Okay.
Yeah,
so that's PG2.
Yeah. So PG2. So like if we're going with the pets example, so you have a bunch of pet processes, and then onto the side you might have like
you got dogs on one side of the tree and cats on the other.
Yeah, and then in the middle you have like person who cares, like a pet owner, right? So they would be able to say, hey, process groups, tell me all of my pets. Like I don't care where they are in the tree, but they have registered themselves to this group that I care about. And then you can send messages to all of them. You can be used for pub sub.
A hierarchy-independent grouping of the processes. Okay, got it. So we talked a little bit about ETS for caching. We've talked about PG2 for process grouping. We've talked about Phoenix PubSub and some of the Erlang distribution stuff that you've done. What else as far as OTP features?
One of the cooler things was I played around with Leaks and Yek.
Leaks and Yek.
Yeah, okay. So it's Lex and Yak are the before Erlang version of these. So these are a way to write BNF grammar.
BNF grammar?
Yeah, I think it's Brachus Nor form is what that's called.
Okay, I have no idea what you're talking about. So.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
So it's just a way. It's like a way to tokenize a language. I think BNF is for parsing instead of lexing. So there's two stages, right? So you lex everything. So when you take a file or a stream of characters, and then you look at each character, you say like, what the hell is this? Mm-hmm. And then you like give it a term and like move on. So it just kind of tokenizes everything. And so it turns your just characters into like known things. So like if there's a curly bracket, we'll say like left curly bracket, characters, right curly bracket.
Is this related to the AST or
sort of?
Similar concept, but not related.
Yeah. So this is turning straight text into an AST.
Oh, okay.
So there's a lexing and a parsing stage. So Leaks is the lexing and Yek is the parsing.
And what were you using this for?
So there's an internal definition language that kind of is loosely HTML as a way of you can tag things as like this is a person, this is an item, this is a room, whatever. It originally started as a way to semantically color things. So like you would know that this piece of text is a person, this piece of text is an object, whatever. So like on the way out,
it's based on pattern matching. It's not smart in any way.
Yeah. So
okay.
You would manually tag it as this is a person, this is an item, etc. Later on, there's a way you could drop in like the ID for an item, and then it would filter out to the tag version of itself with its name. So it's a little more complex than the original. So anyways, the reason I wanted semantic tagging was that it will color the text on the way out through the telnet stream. So like you can, because it's semantically tagged, then you can say like, I want all the people names, anything that's tagged as a person to come out green.
Right.
And so like, maybe the default, I think the default is blue. Any person is blue, but maybe I can't see blue or I don't like the color blue, whatever. So you can change it to a different color. And so that lets the game easily know that instead of like just saying like, well, if I see the ASCII or the RGB values like 0 to 55, 0, then I know that that's a person.
Got it.
So then instead it's curly player, curly their name, and then the close tag.
And you could do even more with this where you could turn those into links that link out to the player.
Yep. Okay. And that's the other thing, stuff that you can type. So like if you type in help, it'll show a bunch of topics that you can do, and then actually you can just click on the topic because it's wrapped in a command tag, and so the game knows that a command tag is something you can click and knows what to do, whatnot. So
wow. Well, Eric, that is all of our questions for today and all of our time. I want to give you an opportunity for any plugs or asks for the audience, your social media, where can people find you, where can people find your libraries, how to get involved with your projects. Go ahead.
Sure. So you can find ExVenture at exventure.org. Grapevine is at grapevine.haus, so house as the German spelling. All of it's on my GitHub. It's just Oestrich. We'll link that. Yeah, and I'm on Twitter at Eric Oestrich.
And this is our first time doing a podcast in person.
Yeah.
Together. Other than the lunch episode, of course. But
yeah.
Thank you very much, Eric, for your time here. Once again, this has been an episode of Smart Software with Smart Logic Season 2, Elixir Internals. Join us for our next episode for more conversation on Elixir Internals. Thank you all very much and have a lovely rest of your day.